The rain came down in sheets that night, turning the streets into rivers of neon and shadow. Mira Valez pressed her back against the cold brick wall of the alley, her heart hammering so hard she thought her ribs might crack. Through the kitchen window of Bellini's she had seen things that couldn't be unseen. 2 men in expensive suits, a briefcase full of cash, and then the gun. The sound of the shot still rang in her ears as she ran, her worn sneakers slapping against the wet pavement. She didn't know where she was going, only that she had to move. Her waitress apron was still tied around her waist, stained with marinara sauce from the dinner rush. The irony wasn't lost on her. She'd spent the entire evening serving wealthy strangers their overpriced pasta, and now she was running from people who could afford to make her vanish without a second thought. A sleek black sedan sat idling at the curb ahead, its windows tinted dark as midnight. Mira didn't think, she just acted. Her fingers wrapped around the door handle and she threw herself into the back seat like a woman diving off a cliff. The leather was soft beneath her trembling body, so different from the torn vinyl of the bus seats she normally rode. "Drive," she gasped, her voice breaking as she slammed the door behind her. "Please, just drive before they see me." The car didn't move. The engine purred quietly, patient as a predator. That's when Mira noticed the silence. Not the absence of sound, but the weight of it, thick and deliberate, like someone choosing their next words very carefully. She looked up at the rearview mirror and met a pair of eyes that made her blood run cold. They were gray, the color of storm clouds over the ocean, calculating and unreadable and somehow impossibly familiar. The man in the driver's seat didn't turn around, but she could see the sharp line of his jaw, the slicked-back dark hair, and the tailored navy suit that probably cost more than her entire year's rent. His hands rested on the steering wheel with an ease that suggested he'd never been afraid of anything in his life. "You shouldn't be here," he said finally, his voice low and smooth, with just a hint of an accent she couldn't quite place. It was the kind of voice that made you listen whether you wanted to or not. Mira's mouth went dry. "I'm sorry, there were men and I saw something I shouldn't have and I needed." "I know what you saw." The words hung in the air like smoke and Mira's stomach dropped. This wasn't some random businessman she'd stumbled into. This was one of them. She reached for the door handle, her survival instincts finally kicking in, but the sharp click of the locks engaging stopped her cold. "I wouldn't do that if I were you," the man said calmly. "The people you're running from are still out there." Through the rain-streaked window, Mira caught a glimpse of movement. 2 figures in dark coats scanning the street, their hands tucked suspiciously inside their jackets. She sank back into the seat, trapped between the devil she knew and the ones she didn't. "Who are you?" she whispered, though somewhere in the back of her mind, a memory was starting to surface like something dredged up from deep water. The man was quiet for a long moment and then he shifted slightly. In the dim glow of the streetlights she saw his profile clearly for the first time. The sharp cheekbones, the small scar above his left eyebrow, and the tattoo peeking out from under his collar. A design she'd seen before years ago on her father's old photographs. Her breath caught. "Adrian." The name escaped her lips before she could stop it, carrying with it a flood of memories she'd spent years trying to forget. He didn't answer right away, but she saw the slight tightening around his eyes, the subtle acknowledgement of recognition. "Hello, Mira," Adrian Gonzalez said quietly, and those 3 words carried the weight of 12 years of silence between them. "It's been a long time." And just like that, the night got infinitely more complicated. Because Adrian Gonzalez wasn't just some random criminal in an expensive car. He was the boy who used to share his lunch with her when they were kids, back when her father still worked security for his family, back before everything fell apart. He was the son of the man who had ordered her father's execution, the heir to an empire built on blood and secrets. And judging by the way he was looking at her now, with something that wasn't quite pity and wasn't quite anger, she had just stumbled into a world where the past never really stayed buried. Adrian put the car in gear and they pulled away from the curb with the kind of smoothness that only came from German engineering and blood money. The city lights blurred past the windows, each one a small world she was leaving behind. "Where are you taking me?" Mira asked, hating how small her voice sounded, how much it trembled despite her best efforts to sound brave. Adrian's eyes met hers in the rearview mirror again, And for just a moment she thought she saw something softer there, something that reminded her of the boy he used to be. But then it was gone, replaced by the cold mask of the man he'd become. "Somewhere safe," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. Then, almost as an afterthought, he added something that made her pulse spike all over again. "Whether you want to be there or not." The car sliced through the rain-soaked streets, carrying Mira Valez away from the only life she'd ever known and toward a truth that had been waiting 12 years to find her. Outside, the city continued its endless dance of light and darkness, oblivious to the fact that two people who were never supposed to meet again had just collided in the back of a luxury sedan, setting in motion a chain of events that would unravel everything they thought they knew about loyalty, family, and the true cost of blood. Welcome back to Tales by Jaylene Lovebirds. If this story already has you hooked, show some love by hitting that like button. Subscribe and join our amazing community of story lovers. We'd be thrilled to have you with us. Drop a comment telling us where you're watching from, and don't forget to turn on notifications so you never miss stories like this. Now let's get back to Mira and Adrian. The silence inside the car was suffocating in a way that had nothing to do with the locked doors or the tinted windows. Mira could hear her own breathing, quick and shallow, mixing with the steady rhythm of the windshield wipers as they battled against the relentless rain. Every instinct she had was screaming at her to get out, to run, to put as much distance between herself and Adrian Gonzalez as humanly possible. But her body wouldn't cooperate, frozen somewhere between shock and a strange, unsettling curiosity about the boy she used to know and the man he had become. Adrian drove with the confidence of someone who owned these streets, navigating through traffic with barely a glance at the other cars. His tattooed hands moved across the steering wheel with practiced ease, and Mira found herself staring at the ink that crawled up from his wrists and disappeared beneath his expensive suit jacket. She remembered when those hands were smaller, gentler, handing her half of his sandwich during lunch breaks while their fathers talked business in hushed tones nearby. "You've been working at Bellini's for 3 months, Adrian said suddenly, breaking the silence. It wasn't a question, and the certainty in his voice made Mira's skin crawl. He'd been watching her, keeping tabs, and she hadn't noticed a thing. "How do you know that?" she asked, though part of her already knew the answer. The Gonzalez family had eyes everywhere in this city, and apparently, those eyes had been turned in her direction. "I know a lot of things, Mira." Adrian's gaze flicked to the rearview mirror, meeting her eyes for a brief moment before returning to the road. "I know you're taking night classes at the community college studying accounting. I know you live in that apartment above the laundromat on 5th Street with the broken buzzer. I know your rent is 2 months overdue." The casual recitation of her life's details felt like a violation, like he'd been rifling through her personal belongings without permission. Mira clenched her fists, anger momentarily overtaking her fear. "So what, you've been stalking me? Why? To finish what your family started with my father." Something flickered across Adrian's face in the mirror, too quick to read. "If I wanted you dead, Mira, you would have been in the ground years ago." The bluntness of his words hit her like a slap, but before she could respond, he continued. "What you saw tonight wasn't random. Those men at Bellini's knew you were there. The hit was deliberately carried out where you would witness it." Mira's mind raced, trying to make sense of his words. "That doesn't make any sense. Why would anyone care if I saw?" "Because you're leverage." Adrian took a sharp turn, and the city lights gave way to darker streets lined with tall gates and manicured hedges. "Your father's name still carries weight in certain circles, whether you know it or not. There are people who believe his daughter might know things, might have access to information that could be valuable or dangerous depending on who's asking." "But I don't know anything," Mira protested, her voice rising with frustration and fear. "My father died when I was 15. He didn't tell me anything about his work, about your family, about any of this." Adrian pulled the car through a set of massive iron gates that opened as if by magic, revealing a long driveway that wound through perfectly maintained grounds. In the distance, a mansion rose from the darkness like something out of a Gothic novel, all stone and shadows and secrets. "Maybe he didn't tell you," Adrian said as he brought the car to a stop in front of the entrance. "But that doesn't mean you don't have what they're looking for." He finally turned around to face her properly, And Mira was struck by how much he'd changed and yet how much remained the same. The gray eyes were harder now, carrying the weight of things he'd seen and done. But somewhere beneath the cold exterior, she could still see traces of the boy who had cried at her father's funeral, standing at a distance while she screamed accusations at his family. "Welcome home, Mira," Adrian said, and the word home sounded both like a promise and a threat. "For better or worse, this is the safest place you can be right now." The car doors unlocked with a soft click, but Mira didn't move. She stared at the mansion before her, understanding with sinking certainty that whatever happened next, her old life was over. The rain continued to fall, washing away the last traces of the world she used to know. The inside of the Gonzalez estate was exactly what Mira expected and nothing like she imagined at the same time. Crystal chandeliers hung from ceilings so high they seemed to touch the sky, casting warm light across marble floors that reflected her bedraggled appearance back at her like a cruel mirror. Everything was pristine, expensive, and cold in the way that only truly wealthy spaces could be. A housekeeper appeared as if summoned by telepathy, an older woman with kind eyes and hands that had seen decades of work, who took one look at Mira's soaked uniform and clucked her tongue in sympathy. "Rosa will show you to your room," Adrian said, his tone businesslike now that they were inside his domain. "Get cleaned up, get some rest. We'll talk in the morning when you've had time to process everything." Mira wanted to argue, to demand answers right then and there, but exhaustion was starting to settle into her bones like lead. The adrenaline that had carried her through the night was fading fast, leaving behind only the trembling aftermath of fear and confusion. She followed Rosa up a grand staircase that curved like a question mark, through hallways lined with paintings that probably cost more than most people made in a lifetime. The room Rosa led her to was larger than her entire apartment, decorated in soft creams and golds that somehow managed to feel warm despite the obvious wealth on display. A four-poster bed dominated the space, piled high with pillows that looked like clouds. Through a doorway, Mira could see an attached bathroom with a tub big enough to swim in. "There are clothes in the closet all your size," Rosa said in accented English, her voice gentle. "Mr. Gonzalez had them brought in this afternoon. If you need anything else, just press the button by the bed." Before Mira could ask how Adrian had known her size or why he'd prepared a room for her before she even got there, Rosa was gone, closing the door with a soft click that sounded too much like a lock for Mira's comfort. She stood in the middle of the room for a long moment, dripping rainwater onto an antique rug that probably cost more than her college tuition, trying to make sense of the impossible situation she'd found herself in. The closet Rosa had mentioned was actually a walk-in the size of her old bedroom, filled with clothes that still had tags attached. Jeans in her exact size, sweaters in colors she actually liked, even pajamas that matched her style perfectly. It was thoughtful in a way that made her skin crawl because it meant Adrian had been paying attention to details about her life that went far beyond simple surveillance. After a hot shower that washed away the rain and the smell of Bellini's kitchen but did nothing to calm her racing thoughts, Mira pulled on a pair of soft cotton pajamas and wandered back into the bedroom. She was too wired to sleep despite her exhaustion, too many questions bouncing around in her head like pinballs. Her eyes landed on a desk by the window, its surface neat and organized in a way that suggested it was more for show than actual use. But something about it nagged at her, some detail that didn't quite fit with the rest of the room's decorator-perfect arrangement. A drawer was slightly open, just a fraction of an inch, as if someone had closed it in a hurry. Mira's fingers moved before her brain could stop them, pulling the drawer open fully to reveal a stack of papers inside. They were bank statements, but not the kind she was used to seeing when she checked her own meager account balance online. These were thick, official-looking documents from institutions she'd only heard of in movies about rich people. And they were all in her name. Mira's hands shook as she rifled through the papers, her breath coming faster with each page. Tuition payments to the community college, marked as paid in full for the past 3 semesters. Rent payments to her landlord, covering the 2 months she supposedly owed plus 3 more months in advance. A medical bill from when she'd sprained her ankle last year and couldn't afford the emergency room visit, stamped with a red "paid" across the top. Every single payment was marked as coming from something called the Valez Educational Trust, a name she'd never heard before. But as she dug deeper into the drawer, pulling out older statements that went back years, the truth became impossible to ignore. The trust had been established 12 years ago, right after her father's death, with a single anonymous donor listed only as benefactor A. Adrian had been paying her way through life, covering her expenses and funding her education from the shadows, all while she'd been scraping by thinking she was doing it alone through sheer determination and double shifts at whatever restaurant would hire her. The realization should have made her grateful, but instead, it filled her with a hot, bitter anger that tasted like bile in her throat. She grabbed the papers and stormed out of the room, her bare feet silent on the marble floors as she followed the sound of voices to what appeared to be Adrian's study. She didn't knock, didn't pause to think about whether bursting in on the head of a criminal organization was a spectacularly bad idea. She just threw open the door and held up the statements like an accusation. Adrian looked up from his desk, unsurprised by her entrance, as if he'd been expecting this exact moment. "I see you found the ledger," he said calmly, setting down the pen he'd been holding. "I suppose we're having that conversation now after all." Adrian didn't flinch when Mira slammed the bank statements down on his mahogany desk hard enough to rattle the crystal tumbler of whiskey sitting near his laptop. He simply leaned back in his leather chair, his expression unreadable, and gestured to the seat across from him as if they were about to discuss something as mundane as the weather. "Sit down, Mira," he said, his voice carrying that same infuriating calm that made her want to scream. "You're going to want to be sitting for this conversation." "I don't want to sit," she shot back, her voice shaking with barely controlled fury. "I want you to tell me what gives you the right to play puppet master with my life. All this time I thought I was making it on my own, struggling and surviving, and it was all a lie. You've been pulling strings behind the scenes like I'm some kind of charity case." Something flickered in Adrian's eyes, a flash of what might have been hurt or anger, but it was gone before she could identify it. "You were never a charity case," he said quietly. "You were a debt I owed." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implications Mira wasn't sure she wanted to unpack. Before she could respond, Rosa appeared in the doorway with impeccable timing, announcing that dinner was ready. Adrian stood, buttoning his suit jacket with practiced ease, and fixed Mira with a look that brooked no argument. "We'll continue this over food," he said. "You haven't eaten since your shift started, and this conversation requires energy you don't have right now." Mira wanted to refuse, to storm back to her room and barricade herself inside until she figured out a way to escape this gilded cage. But her stomach betrayed her with a loud growl, reminding her that Adrian was right about at least one thing. She hadn't eaten, and the adrenaline crash was making her lightheaded. The dining room was another study in excessive wealth, with a table long enough to seat 20 people and a chandelier that probably cost more than some houses. But tonight, only 2 places were set, side by side at one end of the table in an arrangement that felt more intimate than Mira was comfortable with. Dinner was served by silent staff who appeared and vanished like ghosts, bringing course after course of food that would have been delicious if Mira's throat wasn't so tight with tension. Adrian ate with the same controlled precision he seemed to apply to everything else in his life, cutting his steak into perfect pieces and taking measured sips of wine between bites. Mira picked at her food, her appetite gone despite her body's earlier protests, waiting for him to break the silence that had settled over them like a shroud. "Your father was a good man," Adrian finally said, setting down his fork and turning to face her fully. "I need you to understand that before anything else. Mira Valez was loyal, honest, and one of the few people in my father's organization who actually had a moral compass." "Then why did your family kill him?" Mira's voice cracked on the last word, 12 years of grief and rage bubbling up through the careful walls she'd built around those memories. "Why did they brand him a traitor and put a bullet in his head while you all stood by and watched?" Adrian's jaw tightened, and for the first time since she'd climbed into his car, he looked uncomfortable. "Because he was accused of stealing from the family, of selling information to a rival organization. There was evidence, documents with his signature, money transfers that led back to him. In our world, that kind of betrayal has only one punishment." "He didn't do it," Mira said fiercely, leaning forward with her hands clenched into fists on the table. "My father would never have betrayed anyone. He was honest to a fault, the kind of man who returned extra change when cashiers made mistakes. Whatever evidence your family had was fake. I know. Adrian's admission came so quietly that for a moment, Mira thought she'd misheard him. He reached for his wine glass, took a long drink, and then met her eyes with an intensity that made her breath catch. I've known for years that your father was set up, that someone in the organization framed him to cover their own crimes. But by the time I had enough power to investigate properly, the trail had gone cold and the people who might have had answers were conveniently dead. The room seemed to tilt around Mira as the implications of his words sank in. You've known he was innocent and you just let everyone go on believing he was a traitor? You let me grow up as the daughter of a rat, ostracized and whispered about while you knew the truth. I was 17 when your father died, Mira, Adrian said, and there was an edge to his voice now, a crack in his composed facade. I had no power, no authority, nothing but suspicions I couldn't prove. My father wouldn't hear a word against the official story, and questioning it too loudly would have put both of us in danger. So yes, I stayed silent. I survived. And I used what little influence I had to make sure you survived too. The trust fund, Mira said bitterly. Your guilty conscience paying my bills. My attempt at restitution, Adrian corrected. Not guilt, Mira, but responsibility. Your father died protecting secrets that I've spent the last decade trying to uncover. The least I could do was ensure his daughter had a chance at the life he wanted for you. Mira pushed back from the table, the chair scraping against the floor with a harsh sound that echoed through the cavernous room. Well, congratulations on your charitable works, Adrian. Now let me go so I can get back to my life and forget any of this ever happened. I can't do that. Adrian stood as well, moving around the table with the predatory grace of someone who'd been trained to fight since childhood. The people who carried out that hit at Bellini's tonight did it to draw you out, to see who would come to your rescue. They know you're connected to me now and they'll use that connection to try to get to both of us. Then tell them I mean nothing to you, Mira said desperately, backing away as he approached. Tell them you don't care what happens to the daughter of a dead traitor. Adrian stopped a few feet away, and the look on his face was something Mira couldn't quite read. I could tell them that, he said softly. But we'd both know it was a lie. You've been under my protection since the day your father died, whether you knew it or not. And in this world, Mira, protection is a bond that doesn't break just because it's inconvenient. The weight of his words settled over her like chains, beautiful and terrible and impossible to escape. She was trapped not by locked doors or armed guards, but by something far more insidious, by debts she never asked for and protection she never wanted, by the sins of fathers and the complicated legacy of blood that tied her to a man who was supposed to be her enemy. Sleep didn't come easily that night, despite the comfortable bed and the exhaustion that pulled at Mira's bones like an anchor dragging her down into dark water. She lay awake staring at the ceiling, watching shadows dance across the ornate plasterwork as her mind churned through everything Adrian had told her. Her father had been innocent, framed by someone who was still out there, still breathing, still living their life while Mira Valez rotted in an unmarked grave somewhere. The injustice of it burned in her chest like acid, mixing with the confusion of knowing that Adrian had been helping her all these years, protecting her from dangers she hadn't even known existed. When the first hints of dawn started to creep through the heavy curtains, Mira gave up on sleep entirely. She pulled on jeans and a sweater from the closet full of clothes that fit too perfectly, and ventured out into the quiet hallways of the estate. The house felt different in the early morning light, less imposing and more like what it actually was, a lonely fortress built to keep the world at bay. Her bare feet made no sound on the cold marble as she wandered, drawn by some instinct she couldn't name toward a set of double doors she'd noticed the night before. The library was magnificent in the way that only rooms designed to impress could be. Floor-to-ceiling shelves lined 3 walls, packed with leather-bound volumes that looked more like museum pieces than actual reading material. A massive fireplace dominated the 4th wall, cold and dark at this early hour, flanked by leather chairs that had the worn appearance of furniture that was actually used. Morning light filtered through tall windows, turning dust motes into tiny stars that floated through the air like lazy snowflakes. Mira moved through the room slowly, running her fingers along the spines of books with titles in languages she couldn't read. There was something almost sacred about the space, a quietness that felt different from the oppressive silence of the rest of the house. She could imagine spending hours here, losing herself in stories that had nothing to do with crime families and blood debts and fathers who died for secrets no one would name. It was when she reached the far corner of the room, where the shelves met the wall at an odd angle, that she noticed something strange. The wood paneling didn't quite line up properly, leaving a gap so small she might have missed it if the morning light hadn't hit it at just the right angle. Mira pressed her hand against the panel experimentally, and felt it give slightly under her touch, as if there was empty space behind it instead of solid wall. Her heart started to pound as she ran her fingers along the edges of the panel, searching for some kind of mechanism or release. It took several minutes of careful exploration before she found it. A small depression in the wood carved to look like a natural knot, but which pressed inward with a soft click when she applied pressure. The panel swung open silently on well-oiled hinges, revealing a shallow compartment built into the wall itself. Inside was a metal box, the kind designed to be fireproof and waterproof, its surface scratched and dented as if it had survived something violent. Mira's hands trembled as she lifted it out, surprised by its weight. There was no lock, just a simple latch that opened with a flick of her thumb. She carried the box to one of the leather chairs by the window, settling into it as she opened the lid with the careful reverence of someone uncovering buried treasure. The first thing she saw was a badge, its silver surface tarnished with age but still recognizable as official security identification for Gonzalez Enterprises. Her father's photo stared up at her from the ID card attached to it, younger than she remembered him but with the same kind eyes and gentle smile that haunted her dreams. Seeing his face after all these years hit her like a physical blow, and she had to blink back tears that threatened to blur her vision. Beneath the badge was a stack of papers held together with a rusted clip, the edges yellowed with time. The top sheet was covered in her father's handwriting, that careful script he'd used when filling out her homework assignments or writing birthday cards. But this wasn't a letter to her or her mother, nothing warm or personal. It was a list of names and dates, some crossed out with red ink, others circled or underlined with notes scrawled in the margins. Most of the names meant nothing to Mira, but a few jumped out at her. High-ranking members of the Gonzalez organization, people she'd heard whispered about when her father thought she wasn't listening. Under the list was what appeared to be a letter, but the contents made no immediate sense. The words were in English, but they were arranged in patterns that seemed random, almost nonsensical. The shepherd counts his flock at midnight, and 7 stars fall before the harvest moon, and other phrases that sounded like bad poetry or fever dreams. Mira recognized it for what it was, some kind of code, a way of hiding information in plain sight. Her father had been preparing for something, gathering evidence or building a case against someone, and he'd hidden it here in the one place he must have felt was safe. The last item in the box made her breath catch in her throat. It was a photograph, creased and faded, showing her father standing next to another man in front of the Gonzalez estate. The other man was older, distinguished-looking, with the same sharp features and gray eyes that Adrian had inherited. Carlo Gonzalez, Adrian's father, with his arm around her father's shoulders in a gesture that spoke of genuine friendship rather than just professional respect. Both men were smiling, relaxed in a way that suggested the photo had been taken during a rare moment of peace. But someone had drawn on the photograph with red ink, a single word scrawled across the bottom in handwriting that definitely wasn't her father's. Judas. It read, the letters harsh and angry, with an arrow pointing directly at Mira Valez's smiling face. Mira was so absorbed in the contents of the box that she didn't hear the footsteps approaching until Adrian's voice made her jump. "So you found his hiding place," he said from the doorway, his tone unreadable. He was dressed more casually than the night before, in dark jeans and a fitted black sweater that somehow made him look more dangerous rather than less. "I've been looking for that box for 3 years." She clutched the papers protectively against her chest, suddenly defensive. "This was my father's. Whatever's in here, I have a right to it." "I'm not arguing with you," Adrian said, moving into the room with that same predatory grace he'd displayed the night before. In fact, I'm hoping you can help me understand what it all means. I found references to a hidden compartment in some of my father's old journals, but I could never figure out where he'd stashed your father's effects. Your father kept his things? Mira asked, surprised despite herself. Adrian nodded, settling into the chair across from her with his elbows on his knees, leaning forward with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. My father didn't believe your father was a traitor, not really. He had the execution carried out because he had no choice, because the evidence was too damning and the other family heads were calling for blood. But he kept your father's badge, his personal effects, locked them away here like some kind of shrine to his own failure. Mira held up the photograph, watching Adrian's expression shift as he recognized the image. Someone called my father Judas. Someone in your organization believed he betrayed you all, and they wanted everyone to remember it. Or someone wanted everyone to believe he was the betrayer, Adrian countered, reaching for the coded letter with a questioning look. She handed it over reluctantly, watching as his eyes scanned the strange phrases with growing recognition. This is a cipher, an old one that was used for sensitive communications within the organization. Your father was documenting something, building a case. If we can decode this, it might finally tell us who really betrayed the family, who framed him. They spent the next 2 hours hunched over the coded letter, Adrian explaining the cipher system while Mira took notes and tried to make sense of the patterns emerging from her father's cryptic phrases. The work was painstaking and frustrating, requiring them to cross-reference dates with old organizational records that Adrian retrieved from a locked cabinet behind his father's desk. Slowly, painfully, a picture began to emerge. Her father had been tracking money, specifically large sums that were being siphoned from the family's legitimate businesses and funneled somewhere the official books didn't show. He was following the money trail, Adrian said, leaning back in his chair and rubbing his eyes with the heels of his hands. Smart man. Financial crimes leave paper trails that are harder to erase than bodies. Mira was about to respond when the lights went out, plunging the library into darkness broken only by the weak morning sunlight filtering through the windows. The sudden absence of the constant electrical hum she hadn't even noticed made the silence that followed feel unnatural, oppressive. Adrian was on his feet instantly, his entire demeanor shifting from contemplative to alert in the space of a heartbeat. "Stay here," he commanded, his voice low and hard in a way that made the hair on the back of Myra's neck stand up. "Don't move, don't make a sound." But before he could reach the door, the sound of gunfire erupted from somewhere deeper in the house, sharp cracks that echoed through the hallways like deadly thunder. Myra's blood turned to ice as she heard shouting in Spanish, footsteps pounding on marble, and more shots fired in rapid succession. Adrian cursed viciously and moved to a section of bookshelf that swung open at his touch, revealing a hidden arsenal that would have made a small army jealous. "So much for staying put," he muttered, pulling out a handgun and checking the magazine with practiced efficiency before tucking a second weapon into the back of his waistband. He turned to Mira, his gray eyes hard as steel. "Can you shoot?" "What?" "No, I've never even held a gun," Mira said, her voice rising with panic as another burst of gunfire sounded closer than before. "Adrian, what's happening?" "What's happening is that someone just sent a hit squad to my house, which means they either have a death wish or enough backing to think they can get away with it." He pressed the smaller gun into her hands despite her protests, wrapping her fingers around the grip and positioning them properly. "Point this end at anyone who isn't me or Rosa. If they get close, you squeeze this trigger. Don't think, don't hesitate, just shoot." The weight of the weapon in her hand felt wrong, alien, like holding a live snake that might turn and bite her at any moment. But the sound of breaking glass from somewhere nearby made the abstract danger suddenly very real. Adrian moved to the library door, peering out into the hallway with the gun raised and his body positioned in a way that suggested military training far beyond what any civilian businessman would have. "Kitchen door," he said quietly, more to himself than to her. They came in through the service entrance, which means they had inside information about the security rotations. His jaw clenched, and Mira realized he was probably running through a mental list of who might have betrayed him. "We need to get to the panic room in the East Wing. Can you run?" Mira nodded, not trusting her voice to work properly. Adrian grabbed her free hand and pulled her into the hallway, moving fast but controlled, checking corners with the efficiency of someone who'd done this before. They made it maybe 20 feet before a man in black tactical gear rounded the corner ahead of them, his rifle already rising to firing position. Adrian moved faster than Mira thought humanly possible, yanking her sideways into a doorway as bullets chewed up the wall where her head had been seconds before. He returned fire with calm precision, 2 shots that dropped the gunman before he could adjust his aim. The body hit the floor with a heavy thud that made Mira's stomach turn, the reality of violence so much more visceral than anything she'd seen in movies. "Move," Adrian barked, and they were running again, this time with the knowledge that death was actively hunting them through the maze of corridors. They burst through a door into what looked like a sitting room, and Adrian slammed it shut behind them, dragging a heavy sideboard across the entrance as a makeshift barricade. The windows here looked out onto the estate grounds, where Mira could see more figures in tactical gear moving through the gardens with military precision. "How many are there?" she asked, hating how her voice shook despite her best efforts to sound calm. "Too many for a random hit," Adrian said grimly, moving to the window and staying low as he assessed the situation outside. "This is coordinated, professional. Someone paid a lot of money to make sure I don't see tomorrow." A thought struck Mira with the force of a physical blow. "Rosa. The other staff. Are they safe?" Adrian interrupted, understanding her fear. "First sound of trouble they go to a reinforced room in the basement. It's protocol." He turned from the window and something in his expression softened slightly. "I don't risk civilians, Mira. Not even the ones who work for me." The door they'd barricaded shuddered under a heavy impact, followed by shouted commands in Spanish that Mira's limited vocabulary couldn't quite parse. Adrian moved back to her side, and suddenly they were pressed together behind an overturned couch that provided scant cover from the bullets that would inevitably come. She could feel the heat of his body against hers, smell the cologne he wore mixed with the acrid scent of gunpowder, and realized with a strange clarity that this might be the last few moments of her life. "I'm sorry," Adrian said quietly, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that had nothing to do with the danger surrounding them. "I'm sorry I brought you into this world. I'm sorry your father died trying to protect it. And I'm sorry that I can't promise you we're getting out of here alive." The door exploded inward in a shower of splinters, and there was no more time for apologies or regrets. There was only survival, only the deafening sound of gunfire and the feel of Adrian's hand tight around hers as they fought their way through hell together. 2 people bound by blood and secrets and a past that refused to stay buried. The panic room was exactly what its name suggested. A windowless concrete box hidden behind a false wall in the east wing, equipped with enough supplies to survive a siege and communications equipment that could reach Adrian's people outside the estate. They'd made it there through a combination of luck, Adrian's intimate knowledge of the house's hidden passages, and sheer desperate determination. Mira's ears were still ringing from the gunfire, her hands shaking so badly that Adrian had to guide her through the biometric scanner that unlocked the reinforced door. Inside, the panic room was surprisingly spacious, outfitted with monitors showing security camera feeds from around the estate and a small arsenal that made the library's hidden collection look like a toy chest. Adrian immediately went to the communications console, his fingers flying over the keyboard as he sent encrypted messages to people Mira could only assume were his most trusted operatives. Outside, through the grainy security footage, she could see the tactical team methodically sweeping through the house, searching for them with the patience of professionals who knew their targets were trapped somewhere inside. "How long until help arrives?" Mira asked, wrapping her arms around herself to stop the trembling that had nothing to do with the room's temperature. The adrenaline was wearing off, leaving behind the delayed shock of having almost died multiple times in the span of 20 minutes. 20 minutes, maybe less if Marcus can get through the roadblocks they've set up on the access roads. Adrian didn't look up from the screens, but his jaw was tight with frustration. They planned this well. Cut our external security, jammed our communications, and coordinated the attack for the one window when most of my men were off-site. Mira sank into one of the chairs bolted to the floor, her legs finally giving out under the weight of everything that had happened. "You said they had inside information." Someone in your organization betrayed you. Someone in my organization has been betraying me for years, Adrian corrected, finally turning away from the monitors to face her. His sweater had a tear in the shoulder, and there was a smudge of something dark on his jaw that might have been gunpowder or blood. The same someone who framed your father, who's been working against my family since before I inherited control. And I think your father figured out who it was before he died. The coded letter, still clutched in Mira's hand despite everything that had happened, suddenly felt heavier. She looked down at the partially decoded phrases, at her father's careful handwriting documenting crimes he'd never lived to report. The names on his list. Were any of them related to you? Adrian's expression went carefully blank, and Mira recognized it as the mask he wore when he was about to say something he didn't want to. My uncle Tomas Gonzalez is third on the list. So is my father's former consigliere Victor Reyes. Both men are still alive, both still hold positions of power within the organization. And both would have had access to your security schedules, Mira said, the pieces clicking together with horrible clarity. One of them sent those men here today. Most likely. Adrian moved to the small kitchenette area of the panic room, pulling out a bottle of water and pressing it into Mira's hands with surprising gentleness. Drink. You're in shock and I need you focused for what I'm about to tell you. Something in his tone made Mira's already frayed nerves stand on end. She took a sip of water, more to buy herself time than because she was thirsty, and waited for whatever revelation was about to shatter what remained of her understanding of the past. Adrian sat down across from her, close enough that their knees almost touched in the confined space. He leaned forward, elbows on his thighs, and for the first time since she'd known him, he looked vulnerable. I told you that your father was executed for being a traitor, that there was evidence and a trial and all the official procedures our organization follows. That was true as far as it goes. What I didn't tell you was that I was there when it happened. Mira's breath caught in her throat. You watched them kill him. No. Adrian's voice was rough, scraping out of his throat like broken glass. I was the one holding the gun. The room seemed to tilt around Mira, the walls closing in as the meaning of his words sank through her shock-numbed brain. The water bottle slipped from her fingers, hitting the floor with a plastic clatter that echoed in the sudden silence. You killed my father. I was 17 years old, barely a year into my training to take over the family business, and my father put a gun in my hand and told me this was my test. Adrian's eyes were haunted, looking at something only he could see. He said that Mira Valez had betrayed us, stolen from us, and that as the heir, I needed to prove I could make the hard choices. I needed to show I could put the family above everything else, even friendship. So you shot him. Mira's voice was cold, dead, all the warmth leached out of it by the betrayal that cut deeper than any blade could have. You murdered an innocent man to prove yourself to your father. I pulled the trigger, Adrian admitted, and there was no attempt to excuse it, no plea for understanding. But I didn't kill him, Mira. That's what I've been hiding from you, what I've been lying about to protect you from the truth that would put you in even more danger than you're already in. Mira wanted to scream, to hit him, to do something to release the rage and grief that was building in her chest like a pressure bomb about to explode. How is there any difference? You shot my father. He died. Those are the only facts that matter. The gun was loaded with blanks. Adrian's words came out in a rush, as if he'd been holding them back for years and they were finally forcing their way free. My father had arranged the whole thing, staged it to look like an execution but actually designed to fake your father's death and move him into witness protection. Mateo had agreed to testify against the people who were really stealing from the family, and my father was trying to save his life while maintaining the appearance that justice had been served. The security monitors beeped softly in the background, showing Adrian's reinforcements beginning to arrive at the estate's gates. But Mira barely registered it, too focused on the impossible thing Adrian was telling her. You're saying my father survived? That he's alive somewhere? No. The single word fell like a stone into water, and Adrian's expression was carved from pure anguish. He survived the fake execution. He survived long enough to be moved to the safe house where he was supposed to wait until the trial. But someone found him 3 days later, someone who knew he wasn't really dead. And this time they made sure the job was finished properly. Mira felt tears streaming down her face, hot and angry, grieving all over again for a father who'd been killed twice. Who found him? I don't know, Adrian said, and the admission seemed to cost him something. I've spent 12 years trying to find out, following every lead, investigating every person who knew about the fake execution. But whoever ordered the second hit covered their tracks perfectly. All I know is that it was someone close to my father, someone with access to our most sensitive information. Someone like your uncle, Mira said slowly, thinking of the names on her father's list. Or Victor Reyes. Or any of a dozen other high-ranking members of the organization who've since died or been killed, making it convenient that they can't answer questions. Adrian stood up abruptly, pacing the small space like a caged animal. I've been trying to protect you from this knowledge, Mira, because if the person who killed your father finds out you're actively investigating his death, they'll come for you next. Today's attack might already be related to the questions I've been asking, the pressure I've been putting on the old guard. The panic room's door lock beeped, signaling someone entering the access code from outside. Adrian's hand went to his weapon automatically before he checked the monitor and relaxed fractionally. Marcus and the team. We're secure, at least for now. But Mira didn't feel secure. She felt like she'd been standing on solid ground her entire life, only to discover it was actually a thin layer of ice over deep, dark water. Everything she thought she knew about her father's death was a lie, or at least an incomplete truth that was somehow worse than the original story. Why tell me now? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Why not keep lying, keep protecting me from the truth? Adrian turned to face her, and in his eyes she saw a reflection of her own pain, her own anger, her own desperate need for answers. Because after today, after we decode the rest of your father's letter and figure out who's behind all of this, there's going to be a reckoning. And you deserve to know exactly who you're fighting against and what they took from both of us. 3 days after the attack on the estate, Mira found herself standing in front of a full-length mirror wearing a dress that cost more than she used to make in 6 months of waitressing. The gown was a deep emerald green that brought out flecks of color in her brown eyes, cut to fit her body with the kind of precision that only bespoke tailoring could achieve. Her hair had been styled by professionals Adrian had brought in, swept up into an elegant arrangement that left her neck and shoulders bare. She looked like someone else entirely, like the kind of woman who belonged in Adrian's world of wealth and danger. You look perfect, Adrian said from the doorway, and when Mira turned she had to remind herself to breathe. He wore a tuxedo with the same casual elegance that some men wore jeans, his hair styled back and his jaw freshly shaved. But it was his eyes that held her attention, the way they traced over her with an intensity that had nothing to do with their plan for the evening and everything to do with the tension that had been building between them since the panic room. I look like bait, Mira corrected, turning back to the mirror with a frown. Which is exactly what I am, aren't I? You're parading me in front of your entire organization to see who takes the hook. Adrian crossed the room to stand behind her, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body. You're more than bait. You're my declaration that I'm done playing by the old rules, that I won't let the sins of the past dictate the future. He met her eyes in the mirror, his expression serious. But yes, we're also hoping that whoever killed your father will be provoked into making a move. The decoded letter suggests the traitor is someone who'll be at tonight's gala. The annual Gonzalez Foundation Charity Gala was legendary in the city's criminal underworld, a glittering event where the family laundered their reputation along with their money. Politicians rubbed shoulders with mob bosses, society wives chatted with the mistresses of cartel leaders, and everyone pretended that the millions being raised for various charities erased the blood that paid for their designer clothes. It was theater, pure and simple, but theater with very real consequences for those who broke character. What if this goes wrong? Mira asked quietly, her hand instinctively going to the small clutch purse that concealed the gun Adrian had insisted she carry. What if whoever we're looking for decides the easiest solution is to kill us both in front of 500 witnesses? Then they'll have confirmed their guilt and handed me exactly the justification I need to burn down every part of the organization they've corrupted. Adrian's reflection smiled, but there was no humor in it. I've been playing defense for 12 years, Mira, investigating quietly and hoping to find proof without triggering a war. But after they attacked my home, tried to kill you under my protection? The gloves are off. The drive to the hotel hosting the gala took them through parts of the city Mira had only seen from bus windows. Neighborhoods where money whispered instead of shouted, and every building seemed designed to impress rather than simply house people. Adrian's hand found hers in the back seat of the town car, his fingers lacing through hers with a possessiveness that should have annoyed her but instead made her feel anchored in a world that was spinning too fast. "Remember the plan," he said as they pulled up to the red carpet where photographers were already flashing their cameras at arriving guests. "Stay close to me. Don't accept drinks from anyone else. And if you see anyone acting strangely or paying too much attention to you, signal Marcus." He nodded toward the front seat where his head of security sat, the man who'd led the rescue team 3 days ago and who now wore a tuxedo that barely concealed his shoulder holster. The moment they stepped out of the car, Mira understood why Adrian had spent so much time preparing her for this. The attention was immediate and overwhelming, cameras flashing like lightning, reporters shouting questions that Adrian ignored with practiced ease. But it wasn't the media that made her heart race. It was the way every eye in the crowd seemed to lock onto her, calculating and assessing, trying to figure out who she was and what she meant to Adrian Gonzalez. Inside the ballroom, the gala was exactly as decadent as Mira had imagined. Crystal chandeliers cast prismatic light across a sea of designer gowns and expensive tuxedos. A live orchestra played something classical and elegant in one corner while waiters circulated with champagne and hors d'oeuvres that probably cost more per bite than her old hourly wage. Adrian guided her through the crowd with his hand at the small of her back, introducing her to people whose names she'd only heard whispered in conjunction with words like kingpin and untouchable. "Adrian, darling, you've been keeping secrets." The voice belonged to a striking woman in her 50s, wearing diamonds that could have paid off a small country's national debt. Her smile was warm, but her eyes were sharp as she studied Mira with open curiosity. "You must introduce me to your lovely companion. Aunt Isabella, this is Mira Valez," Adrian said smoothly, and Mira felt him tense slightly at the family connection. "Mira, my father's sister, Isabella Gonzalez." The name on her father's list. Mira's training from the past 3 days kicked in, and she smiled graciously while her mind raced. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Gonzalez." "Oh, call me Isabella, dear," the older woman said, taking Mira's hand in both of hers with what seemed like genuine warmth. "Valez. That name is familiar. Weren't you the daughter of one of Carlo's security men? The one who had that unfortunate incident years ago?" The casual dismissal of her father's murder as an unfortunate incident made Mira's jaw clench, but she kept her smile in place. "Yes, Mateo Valez was my father." Something flickered in Isabella's eyes, too quick to read, before her expression settled back into polite interest. "How brave of you to come here, my dear, given the history. Adrian must think very highly of you indeed." She turned to her nephew with a knowing look. "Your uncle will want to speak with you, by the way. He's holding court near the bar, making important men feel important as usual." As Isabella glided away into the crowd, Adrian leaned close to Mira's ear. "That wasn't a warning. That was a threat disguised as social pleasantry." "I gathered that," Mira murmured back, scanning the room for Tomas Gonzalez. "Your family is charming." They found Adrian's uncle exactly where Isabella had said he'd be, surrounded by a small group of men in expensive suits who laughed at his jokes with the kind of enthusiasm that came from fear rather than genuine amusement. Tomas Gonzalez was tall and silver-haired, with the kind of distinguished looks that belonged in political campaigns or cologne advertisements. But when his eyes landed on Mira, something cold and calculating moved behind his polished exterior. "Nephew," he said, his voice carrying across the small circle of sycophants. "I heard rumors you'd brought a guest tonight. How interesting that you chose tonight of all nights to finally acknowledge the Valez girl publicly." The words hung in the air like poison, and Mira realized with chilling clarity that everyone in this room knew exactly who she was and what her presence here meant. Adrian had just painted a target on both their backs, and somewhere in this glittering crowd of criminals dressed as philanthropists, Her father's killer was watching and planning their next move. The confrontation with Tomas started civilly enough, with Adrian deflecting his uncle's barbed comments with the kind of diplomatic doublespeak that came from years of navigating family politics. But Mira could feel the tension coiling tighter with each exchange, like a spring being compressed to its breaking point. The men surrounding Tomas watched with the hungry anticipation of spectators at a gladiator match, sensing blood in the water but not yet sure whose blood it would be. You know, Adrian, your father would be disappointed to see you flaunting this girl around like some kind of trophy, Tomas said, swirling his scotch with calculated nonchalance. Mira Valez betrayed our family, stole from us and died a traitor's death. Bringing his daughter to our most important social event is a slap in the face to everyone who's maintained loyalty to the Gonzalez name. Is that what you believe? Adrian asked quietly, and something in his tone made the crowd around them fall silent. That my father executed a traitor and justice was served? Tomas's eyes narrowed slightly, the first crack in his polished facade. It's not a matter of belief, nephew. It's documented fact. I was there the night the evidence was presented, remember? The bank transfers, the meetings with our competitors, the stolen shipment manifests. Your father had no choice but to act. You were there, Adrian agreed, pulling a folded paper from his jacket pocket with deliberate slowness. In fact, you were the one who brought the evidence to my father's attention in the first place. How convenient that you were so thorough in building the case against Mateo. Mira's heart started to pound as she recognized the paper. It was one of the decoded pages from her father's letter, the one that had taken them 2 full days to completely crack. Adrian had kept this moment from her, planned it without telling her the full extent of what he intended to do tonight. She wanted to be angry about that, but she was too focused on watching the color drain from Tomas's face. What exactly are you implying? Tomas asked, his voice losing some of its smoothness. The men around him shifted uncomfortably, suddenly very aware that they were witnessing something dangerous. I'm not implying anything, Adrian said, his voice carrying across the nearby tables as more people turned to watch. I'm stating clearly that you framed Mira Valez for your own crimes. You were the one stealing from the family, embezzling millions over the course of years. And when Mateo got too close to discovering your operation, you manufactured evidence to make him look like the thief, knowing my father would have no choice but to act. The accusation landed like a bomb in the middle of the glittering gala. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Champagne glasses paused halfway to lips. Even the orchestra seemed to sense the shift in atmosphere, letting their current piece die away into tense silence. That's absurd, Tomas said, but his voice was too loud, too defensive. You're basing this on what, exactly? The paranoid ramblings of a dead man? Some papers that could have been forged by anyone. I'm basing it on 3 years of investigation, on financial records that I've had forensic accountants examine, and on testimony from people you thought were loyal to you but who were actually more afraid of what I'd do if they kept lying. Adrian's hand moved to his jacket again, and this time when it emerged he was holding something small and silver. A recording device. I'm also basing it on the conversation you had 2 hours ago in the hotel's private study, where you told Victor Reyes that the Valez girl and Adrian both need to be dealt with before they uncover the rest of the trail. Victor Reyes, standing near the bar, went pale. His hand started to move toward his jacket, but Marcus was already there, his own weapon drawn and pressed against the older man's spine with professional efficiency. 2 more of Adrian's men materialized from the crowd, flanking Tomas with the kind of coordination that spoke of careful planning. You bugged the private rooms, Tomas said, and something ugly twisted his distinguished features into something closer to his true nature. You set this entire evening up as a trap. I gave you every opportunity to stay quiet, to retire gracefully and live out your remaining years in comfortable obscurity, Adrian said, and there was genuine regret in his voice beneath the steel. But you couldn't leave it alone. You had to try one more time to eliminate the loose ends, to kill the people who were getting too close to the truth. Mira found her voice, stepping forward even though Marcus had warned her to stay back if things went sideways. You killed my father twice. Once with your lies and once with a real bullet. What did he do to you that was worth destroying his life, his family, everything he'd built? Tomas laughed, but it was a bitter, ugly sound. Your father was a Boy Scout in a world that rewards corruption. He was going to expose not just my operation but half the deals that keep this family profitable. He would have brought down legitimate investigations, federal attention, all because he couldn't understand that some rules exist to be broken. He turned back to Adrian with contempt clear on his face. Just like you, nephew. So noble, so principled. Your father understood that power requires compromise. You're going to destroy everything he built with your rigid morality. My father spent the last year of his life trying to fix the damage you caused, Adrian said quietly. The fake execution, the safe house, the plan to use Mateo's testimony, all of it was his attempt to root you out without tearing the family apart. But you found out, didn't you? You discovered that Mateo was still alive, and you sent someone to finish the job properly. Of course I did, Tomas said, and the casual admission sent ice through Mira's veins. I couldn't let him testify. I had too much to lose, too many years invested in building my own empire within your father's shadow. He looked at Mira with something that might have been pity or contempt. Your father died because he was too honest for this world, girl. Take it as a lesson. The ballroom had descended into chaos now, guests pushing toward exits or pulling out phones to record what was rapidly becoming the scandal of the decade. But Adrian's security had already sealed the doors, trapping everyone inside as witnesses to what came next. Adrian drew his weapon with the same smooth motion Mira had seen in the panic room, but this time there was no urgency, no desperate survival instinct. This was deliberate, calculated, a public execution in everything but name. Tomas Gonzalez, in front of these witnesses and by the authority granted to me as head of this family, I'm declaring you guilty of theft, murder, and conspiracy against the organization. The penalty is death. You don't have the spine, Tomas spat, but Mira could see the fear in his eyes now, the realization that Adrian wasn't bluffing. Your father couldn't pull the trigger on Mateo, so he made you do it with blanks. You're not a killer, Adrian. You're pretending at power. My father taught me that sometimes the hardest decisions are the only right ones, Adrian said, and his hand didn't shake as he aimed at his uncle's chest. This is one of those times. The shot echoed through the ballroom like thunder, final and absolute. Tomas crumpled to the floor, his expensive tuxedo blooming red, his distinguished face frozen in shock. Victor Reyes tried to run, but Marcus put him down with 2 precise shots before he made it 3 steps. The message was clear. The old guard was finished and a new order was rising from its ashes. Mira stood frozen, watching Adrian holster his weapon with mechanical precision while around them people screamed and scattered and tried to process what they'd just witnessed. He turned to her, and in his eyes she saw the weight of what he'd just done, the cost of justice that could never be fully paid. It's over, he said simply. Your father can rest now. But Mira knew it wasn't over, not really. This was just the end of one story and the beginning of another, written in blood and truth and the complicated reality of loving someone who lived in a world where violence was sometimes the only language people understood. 6 months after the gala that the city's newspapers called the bloodbath at the Grand View, Mira stood in her cap and gown watching the sun rise over the estate's gardens. The morning was cool and clear, the kind of perfect spring day that felt like a reward after a long, brutal winter. Today was her graduation, the moment she'd been working toward through double shifts and sleepless nights and mountains of student debt that no longer existed thanks to Adrian's ghost payments. But standing here now, diploma ceremony just hours away, she found herself thinking less about the achievement and more about the journey that had brought her to this strange, impossible place. The estate had changed in the months since Tomas's death. Adrian had moved quickly to consolidate power, forcing out the old guard who'd grown comfortable with corruption and replacing them with younger members who understood that the world was evolving and the Gonzalez family needed to evolve with it. It wasn't a complete transformation. You couldn't wash away decades of criminal enterprise with good intentions and a few executive decisions, but it was a start. Legitimate businesses were being separated from illegal operations. Books were being cleaned. And slowly, carefully, Adrian was building something that looked less like a crime syndicate and more like a corporation that just happened to have a complicated past. Mira heard footsteps on the terrace behind her and knew without turning that it was Adrian. She'd learned the rhythm of his walk over the past months, the way he moved with purpose even when he was just coming to find her in the garden. They'd spent countless hours together decoding the rest of her father's documents, tracking down the remaining threads of Tomas's corruption, and slowly learning to exist in each other's presence without the weight of their shared history crushing them both. "You should be getting ready," Adrian said, coming to stand beside her at the balcony railing. He was already dressed for the ceremony in a dark suit that made his gray eyes look like storm clouds. "Your mother called. She's nervous about seeing the estate meeting me officially. I think she's convinced I'm going to have her fitted for cement shoes." Mira smiled despite herself. Her mother had been the hardest part of all this, the one piece of her old life that didn't quite fit into her new reality. They'd had difficult conversations over the past months, tears and accusations and eventually something that looked like understanding. Her mother would never fully accept Adrian or what he represented, but she was trying, which was more than Mira had hoped for. "She'll be fine once she sees I'm happy," Mira said, and realized as she said it that it was true. She was happy, or at least something close to it. Not in the simple, uncomplicated way she'd been before that rainy night when she'd climbed into the wrong car, but in a deeper, more complex way that came from knowing the worst parts of someone and choosing them anyway. "Are you?" Adrian asked, and there was vulnerability in the question that he rarely let show. "Happy, I mean. Not just safe or comfortable, but actually happy here with me with all of this." Mira turned to face him fully, taking in the man who'd saved her life and complicated it in equal measure. "I think I'm building toward happy. I think we both are." She reached for his hand, lacing their fingers together in a gesture that had become natural over the months. "My father wanted me to have a better life than he did, to escape the violence and the secrets and all the darkness that comes with your world. But I don't think he would have wanted me to be alone, to live half a life because I was too afraid to trust anyone. He would have wanted you to be safe above everything else," Adrian said, his thumb tracing circles on the back of her hand. "And I'm not sure being with me qualifies as safe." "Maybe not," Mira agreed. "But it's real. And after months of discovering that everything I thought I knew about my father's death was a lie, I value real more than safe." The sun climbed higher, painting the gardens in shades of gold and amber that made everything look almost magical. In a few hours, Mira would walk across a stage and accept a diploma that represented years of struggle and determination. Her mother would be there, uncomfortable but proud. Adrian would be there too, sitting in the back where his presence wouldn't overshadow her moment. And somewhere, in whatever place people went when they left this world, she liked to think her father was there as well, finally at peace knowing his name had been cleared and his daughter had found her way to solid ground. "I have something for you," Adrian said, pulling a small box from his jacket pocket. "Graduation present, but also something more." Inside the box was a key, silver and newly cut, attached to a keychain that bore the Gonzalez family crest. But there was also a photograph, carefully preserved behind glass, the picture of her father and Carlo Gonzalez that had been defaced with the word Judas, now restored and cleaned, the cruel inscription removed. "I had it professionally restored," Adrian explained as Mira's eyes filled with tears. "And I'm having his name added to the family memorial, listed among the members who died in service to the organization. Not as a traitor, but as a hero who gave his life trying to protect us all from corruption." "And the key?" Mira asked, her voice thick with emotion. "To the estate, to my apartment in the city, to anywhere you want to go and know you can come back." Adrian's expression was serious, intense in the way that always made her heart race. "I'm not asking you to commit to anything you're not ready for. But I'm telling you that you have a place here, Mira. Not as a guest or someone under protection, but as someone who belongs." Mira closed her fingers around the key, feeling its weight and all it represented. A few months ago she would have thrown it back in his face, would have insisted that she didn't need his charity or his protection or his complicated feelings. But she'd learned that strength wasn't always about standing alone. Sometimes it was about letting someone stand with you, about building something new from the ruins of the past. I'm not the same person who jumped into your car that night, she said quietly. That girl was running from everything, too scared to face the truth about what happened to her father. I'm not running anymore. No, Adrian agreed, pulling her close until her head rested against his chest and she could hear his heartbeat steady and sure. You're not running. You're choosing. And that makes all the difference. Later, standing on the graduation stage with her diploma in hand and the applause of strangers washing over her, Mira looked out at the audience and found Adrian exactly where he said he'd be. He caught her eye and smiled, and in that moment she understood that this was what her father had really wanted for her. Not safety or simplicity, but the courage to write her own story, even if that story led her down paths he never could have imagined. She was Mira Valez, daughter of a hero, survivor of violence, and something more than either of those titles suggested. She was a woman who'd walked through fire and come out stronger on the other side. And if that fire had led her to the heart of her father's enemy, to a man who'd pulled a trigger in her father's name and then spent 12 years trying to make it right, well, maybe that was the truest kind of justice after all. The kind that didn't erase the past but transformed it into something new. The kind that turned enemies into allies, pain into understanding, and the daughter of a condemned man into someone who finally, impossibly, felt like she'd come home. Thank you for joining us on Mira and Adrian's journey through shadows, secrets, and the complicated truth about loyalty and love. Their story reminds us that sometimes the people we're supposed to fear are the ones who understand our pain the most, and that justice isn't always clean or simple. It's messy, costly, and requires the courage to face truths we'd rather keep buried. What did you think of Adrian's revelation about the fake execution? Did Mira make the right choice in staying? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. We love hearing your perspectives on these complex moral choices. If this story kept you on the edge of your seat, don't forget to hit that like button and share it with someone who loves a good suspenseful romance with a dark twist. Your support helps us bring you more stories that challenge expectations and explore the gray areas between right and wrong. And if you haven't already, make sure to subscribe so you never miss our next tale. We've got more stories coming that will make you question everything you thought you knew about loyalty, family, and the true cost of redemption. Until next time, remember, sometimes the wrong car takes you exactly where you need to be.